Hi, this is Jamey with Stonemeyer Games, and I'm here today to talk about my favorite game mechanism in Trickerion, a new game about magicians. Trickerion is a game that I played 2 times this week. The first time we played it, we played pretty much everything incorrectly, and the next time we played it with all the correct rules and had a pretty good experience with it. And so I wanted to talk about a few mechanisms that stood out in this game, and there are a lot of interlocking mechanisms. I'm just going to focus on two. The first is very simple. In Trickerion, you place workers on the board. There are a few other mechanisms tied to that, but that's the basic idea. You're placing workers on the board. And money is pretty tight in the game. For every worker you use, with one exception, like the worker that represents you don't have to do this, but there are regular workers and then special workers. You have to pay them at the end of the round if and only if you actually use them. And I really, really like this. Because you can acquire more workers in the game. There is a separate cost associated with that. It's not money, but there's a cost to acquire workers. But then if it comes to the point where you just don't need to use a worker for a certain round and money is tight, you just don't have to use them. And you don't have to make that decision until during the round. So during the round, as people are placing workers, you might get to the point where maybe someone took the thing that you wanted on the board, on a certain area of the board, and you can just decide not to use your worker and save the coin or 2 coins that you would have to pay that worker at the end of the round. I really, really like that. There are lots of games where you have to feed your workers or pay your workers, and it's never a choice, at least from what I've seen. But in this game, I like that it's a choice as to whether or not you use the worker at all, and therefore save the cost that you have to pay that worker. The other mechanism that I thought was really interesting, and it's more of a component really, but in Trickerion, when you're building up your spells, basically, I think there's a different word the game uses, but your tricks, the different tricks that you can perform to people because you're magicians, and there are 4 decks of cards, 4 different types of tricks, really beautiful art on all these tricks, and the things that are required to do the tricks are thematically integrated into the theme of each trick. And there are a lot of them. Like I said, there are 4 decks. I believe there are 12 different cards per deck. And whenever you acquire a new spell of a certain type, you're not just like picking from the top of the deck. It's not random. You are looking. You can choose from the entire deck. And I think in some games what they would have done and just said, okay, well, when you make that decision, pick up the deck of cards, look through it, and pick the card. Trickerion added a component to make this so much better, where each player gets their own spell book that has a little thumbnail picture of every different type of trick or spell, whatever they're called, and every player has their own spell book. So at any time during the game, and there is some downtime in the game, but when that downtime happens, you can look through your spell book to kind of plan ahead and pick whichever spells you want to use that game, which I really, really like. This is a brilliant component that I would love to see in more games. Any game where you have to like look through the deck to pick a card at any time should have one of these spell books because it gives you something to do. It gives you an opportunity to plan ahead and pick that card before your turn comes rather than slow the game down. I've made decisions as a designer. There have been opportunities in my games where I could have put a card in the deck that says, or added an ability that says, look through the deck and pick a card. But I've avoided that because it creates instant downtime where all the other players are waiting for that player to make their decision. And this component has solved that problem now. If you add this component where every player has their own reference guide, not one reference guide, but everyone has one, then you can have that element or that ability in games where you can look through a deck and pick the card you want. And plus, it just feels, I think Mage Wars, I haven't played Mage Wars, but in Mage Wars, everybody has their own spell book. And there's some sort of satisfaction from looking through this open book of abilities that you can choose. And it may seem overwhelming, but really there are like little cues on the cards where like you're trying to match up certain materials, resources that you've acquired. So you can kind of not look at cards that don't have those resources and focus on the ones that do, which is also pretty clever. Anyway, great component for any game where you need to look through the deck. If you have any other examples of games that do that, I'd love to hear them. Thanks.